All right, thank you everybody for being here. My name is Julie Roosa. I am the First Amendment Specialist at the Greenlee School of Journalism, and part of my job is planning events to help increase understanding and awareness about our First Amendment. So I always start my events by asking the very obvious question, what is the First Amendment? Who can answer that? What is the First Amendment? Go for it.
Freedom of speech and expression, religion.
All right, good. So freedom of speech, expression, and religion is what was shared. Thank you very much for taking that bold step to tell us what the First Amendment is. At the last couple of events where I have asked that question, people have answered in the form of a question. So freedom of speech? And you stated it very clearly, and you're absolutely right. The First Amendment protects our freedom of speech, also our freedom to petition the government for a redress of grievances, freedom of the press, freedom to peaceably assemble, and our freedom of religion or from religion. So those 5 freedoms are embedded in the 45 words of our First Amendment, and we use this week, our First Amendment Days week, to talk about, to celebrate, and to educate each one of those 5 freedoms. So we thank you for being here. Our First Amendment Days is in its 20th year. If you can imagine, we've been having a week or sometimes at least a day devoted to these very conversations. So we appreciate you being here. I am going to let the panelists here introduce themselves in just a moment. But I do want to welcome any questions that you have. There's no need to wait until the end of our discussion here. Please ask away as we're talking about some of these really important issues when it comes to our right to protest. And you'll notice that I didn't necessarily mention protest as specifically one of those 5 freedoms, but just as you mentioned, the idea of protest really brings together all of those freedoms in many ways to form that particular right. So the right to peaceably assemble, along with the right to speak, generally speaking, and to petition, all sort of create this idea of our right to protest. So we wanted you to know exactly what that right means and how to exercise it. So with that, I'm going to ask again the panelists if you would be so kind as to introduce yourselves and explain kind of what brings you to the table here today. And then our first question will be sort of a simple one. Do students have the right to protest on the university campus?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Jacobs. I am the Assistant Chief of Police here at ISU Police. I have been with the agency for 20 years. I am an ISU alumni, so I got my undergraduate degree here at Iowa State, but I did get my master's degree at Concordia University up in St. Paul, Minneapolis. And I am here today to kind of help answer any questions you may have as it relates to the First Amendment, as well as your right to protest here on campus, as well as what type of response you may get from ISU Police if you ever contact us in regards to your First Amendment rights, or if you're having issues with not being allowed to express your freedom to express, in other words, just to have your right to express your freedoms as it relates to the First Amendment. So looking forward to your questions, and I'm happy to be here, and thank you for being here as well.
Hello, my name is Amanda Knief, and I am the current director of the lectures program here at ISU, which, for those of you who don't know, is a joint program between student government and the provost office. Student government provides a specific pot of money every year for us to bring in speakers and experts and authors and people that students want to hear from and have a chance to meet with, and the provost pays my salary. So I have lots of people to keep happy. I also am an Iowa State alum. I graduated with a degree in the newly named Greenlee School of Journalism, and then decided in my mid-20s that I wanted to do something a little bit more proactive when it came to policy, so I went to Drake Law School. And I've spent most of my legal career in public policy, lobbying, and constitutional law, including working for the Library of Congress, Congressional Research Service, and working as Legislative Policy Counsel for the Iowa Legislature. And then I became an event planner and it's great. So I'm here to offer my perspective. I have been involved in many protests, including the Women's March and the Science March in DC. I was involved in protests on campus when I was a student, and I have that perspective, and also because we sometimes bring in people to speak to students that other people do not agree with. I have a lot of experience working with people across campus about protesting.
Okay, very good. Thank you and welcome. I also am an Iowa State grad, so we have the trifecta up here to talk to you today. So as I was walking over here, I don't know about the rest of you, but I made my way through a peaceful assembly outside. We could probably call it a protest, if you will. There were signs, and I understand individuals representing a perspective about the abortion issue. And so let's start with that. Let's share with the campus here about how the right to protest works on campus. What is the actual process? So how did those individuals achieve the ability to set up their photos and their staff members on our Iowa State University campus?
Absolutely. So I'm going to also refer a little bit to our screen here in just a moment as I start to talk about the process. There's actually two different types of processes as it relates to a group protest demonstration, if you will, as it relates to over 50 people or under 50 people. In regards to this situation, this is actually a group that's under 50. I believe they have 10 individuals affiliated with their group. However, in order for them to go ahead and set up what they did, they went ahead and contacted ISU. They still contacted the events management office, though they would not be required to do so because they are under 50 people. However, that being said, they wanted to ask for a specific space. Now, you've probably seen throughout your time here at ISU that there's been some different areas that have been kind of unofficially designated as free speech zones. But I think it's important for all of you to understand that the university, specifically through the Board of Regents policy, which is 4.2, it's the freedom of expression. None of the three universities are actually allowed to say this specific outdoor space is free speech only. Because technically any public space here on campus can be considered a place for an individual to go ahead and express their free speech. Now, that being said, each campus has the ability to go ahead and initiate their own policies as it relates to time, place, and manner. For this specific group, they went ahead and made contact with the university, so they were aware that we were all aware that they were coming. They also made contact with our agency. So they wanted to know, okay, exactly what are the requirements, because here's what we're going to be bringing. Number one, you cannot have any sound amplification outside of a megaphone. So that means you cannot plug in anything. One of the main reasons why you can't have sound amplification outside of a megaphone is it could very well disturb classes that are being held within the buildings on campus. If you do have a megaphone, you have to take care and to make sure that you're not directing your sound toward a building where it would normally have classes in session at that point. And then you also, if you have any signs, as you know, if you've been past this group, you notice they might have some signs. Most of the signs for most demonstration or protests need to be able to be carried by no more than 2 people. If you have larger signs, you must have someone within your group with those signs, and they cannot stay there during a permanent time frame. In other words, you can't put them in the ground and then walk away. Once the protest or demonstration is over with, those signs must be removed, and they have to go with the group as well. And then, of course, we always provide any type of guidelines, and these guidelines can be found through the event authorization process. You can kind of find them in a couple of different places. You can find them on the Dean of Students website, and you can also find them on Office of Risk Management. But as we were kind of talking a little bit, it can get a little frustrating, so you may have to go through more than a couple of clicks to find that information. When in doubt, I always direct everyone to the policy library, so you just go up to the index, you hit P for policy, and you scroll on down, and all of our guidelines as it relates to any type of protest or demonstration on campus are going to be found underneath the facilities use, grounds, and use there. So you can go ahead and just open that up, and you're going to get a variety of information as it relates to where you can hold your protest, what you can have at your protest, what does it look like, and how long can you be there. For most protests, anytime between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. you can hold your protest. If you have any safety concerns, we do ask that you contact us at ISU Police to let us know what your safety concerns may be. For example, for this protest today, we do have some officers who are in plain clothes who are just monitoring it. And just so you're aware, the purpose of us being present at any protest or demonstration is we're there to ensure the safety of those who are both protesting as well as those who may be there just participating, as well as counter-protest individuals, because we want to make sure everyone's right to protest is protected. And number two, making sure that we are following the rules as it relates to we're not blocking sidewalks or entrance to buildings. If a protest turns into a march, which we have had quite a few of them do in the past, we want to walk with that group to ensure that they can cross the street safely and make sure we're not causing any long-term disruption of traffic, though I know we've had protests that have done that in the past. And again, what we're going to do is just be there for the safety of everyone to make sure nobody gets hit by a car and no one else gets, experiences any physical negative reactions from people. In other words, assault or harassment. And that's kind of the basics right there. So if you wanted to add anything additional or if you had any specific questions.
Yes.
Let's say, for example, that students wanted to protest against the time, place, and manner restrictions that are put in place in this policy, and they deliberately have 51 students out there right now without any permission. What kind of action would the university take against them?
That is a good question. I can tell you it's not a criminal act, so ISU Police would not be necessarily doing anything outside of just making sure you're not blocking entrances or sidewalks or anything like that. But as it relates to, it doesn't matter what your topic is. If you want to protest that, absolutely you have that right to protest. If it happens to be 51 students, okay, I wouldn't get upset over 51 students, I can tell you that. Now, I can't guarantee you that someone from the Dean of Students office or from the university would say, wait a minute, what group are they affiliated with? And maybe it's not a student group. Maybe it's just a group of students who decided, you know what, we don't like this policy, let's go hang out and talk about it. I think it's numbers. I don't want us getting hung up on numbers. Now it turns out if it becomes 100 people or so, are we going to have that an occasion? Are we going to say, oh, well, you're over 51, you didn't, register with events authorization? We're still going to respond, and we're still going to be there as a protective force, so to speak. In other words, making sure, are we following all the other rules? If you're following the grounds rules and everything else as it relates to the requirement for protest outside of the, oh, you didn't register, I think you're going to be allowed to be there. We've had that happen in the past.
What's the procedure for events like when Sister Cindy came? That was just a crowd of people. There wasn't any a crowd of people just formed. So what's the procedure for things like that? How does that work?
Since we are a public university, anyone can come onto campus and do their thing. Sister Cindy, because her group was under 50. Now, we're not talking about people who attend the protests. That's a little bit different. Again, when we find out about these issues, we did know ahead of time she was coming. Not an official, yes, I'm coming from Sister Cindy, but rather we try to keep our ear to what's going on around our other colleges and universities. So, okay, we knew she was going to be at Drake University this day. Chances are she's coming to Iowa State in the next couple of days. So we just simply prepare for that. Again, we're going to just come out and monitor. A lot of times we have engaged with speakers when they've been disruptive because they had usually due to sound amplification and they were actually disturbing academic classes. But in that regard, we just try to keep it, monitor it, and make sure everybody is safe.
Thank you for that question. Speaking of speakers, Amanda, same question for you. We know Sister Cindy was on Central Campus, but sometimes we have speakers who are in our buildings and presenting programs that may cause us to want to speak out in some way, shape, or form. What would the process be when we have speakers who come to campus that cause us concern?
So my role is to make the event successful for the students and the units that are involved in it. And if we become aware that there are people who are opposed to the person who is going to be speaking, I always try to open dialogue. One of the things that we really enforce, I guess you could say, in all of our contracts with speakers is that there always has to be a Q&A. So if you have a problem with a speaker, you have the ability to come to the event and ask a question. I can't guarantee that every question will get asked, just depends how big the crowd is, but most speakers will take questions just until everybody's done. And that's a great way to present the speaker with an opportunity to address your concerns, your complaints, whatever your issue is. And so we really try to foster that dialogue and make sure that students and sometimes community members are aware of that. If we become aware that there are groups that want to protest, we work with whatever venue we're at. Our two main venues are here at the MU and Stevens Auditorium. And then at that point, we would notify the demonstration committee on campus so that they are aware. Because we, again, like Carrie said, Assistant Chief Jacobs said, you want to protect safety. We don't want to stop people from expressing their concerns about a speaker or about the message a speaker brings. That's not in my job description. My job with the event is to facilitate that communication as part of the event. There are events where we do request, or ISU PD says we would like to have officers on site. And that is not to stop communication or protest or discussion, but to prevent any confrontations that could become a safety issue. Because there are issues that come on campus that inflame passions on both sides of whatever issue it is. And so my first concern always is student safety. And we will put in contracts, for example, that a staff person has to hold a microphone or has to be present when questions are asked so that students are not put into conflict with each other. And if the topic is particularly sensitive or controversial, sometimes we will do texting questions. And that allows people to ask a question without having to identify themselves publicly in front of maybe an unfriendly audience. And so we have a variety of methods to do that. Now, there are times we've had people organize online protests, petitions, things like that. We just watch them, and we try to make contact if that is something that group or that individual wants. And if we become aware that people want to be outside of the venue or planning or coming in to disrupt it, then we work with the Dean of Students Office, we work with ISU PD, and even maybe Ames PD. Again, not to stop it, but to ensure the safety of everybody who shows up.
Thank you, that's helpful. To just sort of know the process. I think we've kind of established that we are a public university, so we are open to a variety of viewpoints, and we encourage the kind of dialogue and debate that comes in a free society. But talk to us a little bit more, if you would, about when exercising our right to protest becomes a concern for law enforcement.
That is actually a really good question. First of all, as we know, hate speech is protected speech. Even though there's no legal definition of hate speech, it is oftentimes utilized to define offensive speech or any actions which are offensive that do not fall underneath the criminal code. But they're still condemnable, they're still hurtful, and they can still have consequences as long as those consequences are not being issued by government agencies such as law enforcement. However, the university can still issue sanctions against a student or a student group for hateful speech or hateful behavior. That being said, what we're going to be interested in, one of the reasons why we like to be present during certain types of protest demonstrations or even just a controversial speaker, is to ensure that someone's passion does not get out of sorts. And what I mean by that is we've had individuals in the past who have wanted to physically confront individuals from the other side of an issue, that is clearly very intimidating and can be very upsetting and very dangerous for another individual, because first and foremost, they have no idea what that person's intent is. And any time that another individual is trying to either shut down someone else's speech through means which are considered to be harassing, intimidating, or they have the thought that, I think this person's going to assault me. Because one unique aspect about our assault code here in Iowa, in order to be charged with general assault, you don't have to lay hands on anyone. If that other person believes and that you have the means to carry out an assault against that other person, that can still be criminal behavior. Spitting on someone in the state of Iowa is considered an assault, so you can be charged for that. So any type of behavior like that is definitely going to get our attention. Anytime someone wants to physically block the passageway of another person during a demonstration, protest, or even during a lecture is a very big concern for us, because first and foremost, we want to make sure everyone is safe. So we want to make sure that those speakers or those protesters or demonstrators or counter protesters, demonstrators are able to get out of the area safely, as well as, of course, any type of vandalism or criminal mischief that may occur during the protest process or demonstration time frame is also going to get our attention as well. And of course, any directed threats toward an individual or group of people, we're going to take very seriously.
First, I apologize. Thank you, Mariana. She was returning something, and I wasn't in my office, and so I said, come to the Campanile room, and she's like, no. We, as the representative for the lectures program, it is not my job to stop students from protesting or peaceably assembling or attending an event. And my personal way of handling this is if you need to make a statement, if you need to chant, if you need to make noise to express your upset or you're against something, you have that right. To the point, though, where you cannot stop someone else from speaking. So I would not be in support of someone coming in and trying to prevent an event, because that is not dialogue, and that's not respecting the other side's free speech. So I would have no problem if people wanted to come in and express it, but then if they could not stop, we would ask them to leave. Not because we're trying to stop their speech, but we also have to protect the speech of those who came or who were invited. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, question.
Well, I don't know if this is a question, but I would like y'all to, you might want to comment on it. Back in 2005, when we were doing the protest, it was a religious aspect. We divided it, you know, every freedom had their own day. And the freedom of religion was Friday, but we started on Thursday night. And a man named Dan, we got a man named Dan Barker to come in.
FFRF.
Yeah, he's a former minister who's has become an atheist and, you know, started his own organization. And he came, and it was like the Memorial Hall was, we had like 750 people come and listen to him. And but as far as protest is concerned, he was, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes from the end of his speech, and someone, and we don't know who, cut the sound off. You know, because there were so many people there, you had to have the microphones and all that, and so we, you know, kindly waited until they could turn the sound back on, and then, but we considered that, you know, kind of a protest to his speech, but it was pretty interesting compared to.
Yeah.
You don't usually have protests like that.
Any comment on the idea of sort of interfering with a protest by other means? So not necessarily disciplining the participants, but maybe taking actions that prevent the speech from being heard.
So all the events on campus that involve students, and if you are a student participating in an event on campus, the student handbook still applies to you. And so you are governed by those directives about how to behave and how to conduct yourself, and that applies. So you may not be violating the First Amendment, but you could be violating the student code. And so that's something to think about. And I think that one of the best things about the First Amendment is that you can stand on your soapbox and shout out whatever it is you believe, and there can be somebody 5 feet from you on their soapbox shouting the exact opposite thing. And that's okay. Now, when we're trying to do an official event, we want to make room for that discourse, but not to the point that it stops the other side from getting to speak, because that is not a celebration of free exercise of your speech or peaceable assembly. So for us, you know, if somebody is trying to make a point with noise or displays, if they can then stop and want to remain, we would allow that. But if they can't, we would ask them to leave, not in a punishing way, but to respect the rights of those who came to hear the speaker and for the speaker themselves.
And I'll just kind of add on to that, especially for these lectures and events where we're asked to do just general standby to be present. We are usually going to be the last line when it comes to asking anyone to leave, because it always starts with the staff, just as Amanda had mentioned. More times than not, individuals will either self-select, they're like, okay, I'm done, I said my piece, now I'm going to leave. Great. Other times, staff members may ask them to leave. If it gets down to us, even though it comes to us, we're also going to simply ask that question. Okay, you've been asked to leave now by the staff. We need you to leave. Yes, you can be charged with criminal trespass if you refuse to leave. However, that, excuse me, that is an absolute last option for us. We would much rather just walk the individual out and have them leave. That, because at the same time, it almost seems like a punishment. It's like, okay, I said my piece, and now I'm getting in trouble for it. Again, it's a fine line that we do walk, but again, that is always an option. It is our very last option. And usually, if we do decide to determine, okay, maybe this individual does need a sanction, but they don't necessarily need a criminal sanction. If they are a student, what we may do is go ahead and refer them to the Dean of Students' office as opposed to writing them a criminal citation for their behavior. Because again, there's a bigger issue going on here. Someone expressed their opinions, their ideas. For whatever reason, it didn't work well, and they were asked to leave. We're not going to stand there and debate with them whether or not it was right or it was wrong. We're simply going to try to get them out of the area so they can, number one, continue on without an issue, and then of course, if not, we do explain, look, here's what you can face, but again, that's always going to be a last option. So if you do see us in those spaces, please understand we're not there to hammer down on everyone to say, if you get out of line, we're watching you. We're going to make sure that if you go too far left or go too far right, we're going to get you. That's not the point at all. It's to, again, as Amanda mentioned, to make sure everybody has the opportunity and the right to have their freedom of expression.
Can I have one more thing? Yes. So this is my 4th year as director of the lectures program, and a good 18-20 months of that was all online. And we did deal with online trolls. We use WebEx, and people would sometimes post obscene things in the chat. And it's really great because I can just eject them. And I would. If it's obscene, if it is derogatory, and there is no value in discourse, and I get to make that decision, I can pop them out of the room. Now, when we're in person, I can tell you, knock on wood, I've never had to deal with a student. I've had students ask impassioned questions. I've had students come up to afterwards and talk to speakers. But I find that students are usually generally very respectful, very interested in a dialogue. Sometimes they do want to make a point. It tends to be community members who don't ask questions but want to make some sort of lengthy statement. And at some point, I will cut that off because that is not the point. And our first mission is to serve students. And while we welcome and want the community, if a community member is overstating their statement rather than asking a question, or if they are taking up too much time with the speaker, I will move them along. And we've never had anybody, I wouldn't say they weren't upset, but we've never had a problem with it. And so I do curtail some speech that way because it fits with the aims of our programming, not because I'm trying to silence anybody.
Thank you for that clarification. I think that fits in with what was mentioned earlier about time, place, and manner restrictions, and as long as those are content neutral, there is that ability to sort of regulate speech in that way. So, thank you.
I wonder if any of you would speak to, there are times when the public spaces are rented for private events. We have weddings and things. We have a lot of political visitors during some years more than others, and I just wonder if you can speak to that when we have sort of that private overlay on top of public spaces.
That is a great question, and that is one of the perks of always registering your event, whether or not you fall under the over 50 or under 50, because basically what you're doing is you're guaranteeing a space that you really want to utilize for that event, because if there is another private event going on in that space, that's their space for the time that they have rented it, because they have paid the university money to have that space utilized for whatever event they have going on, whether it's weddings, political events, and such. Now, I do want to make just a really quick notation on the political events. The university has designated 5 specific areas on campus where we prefer to hold political events, particularly political campaigns, because every couple years, we always have visitors coming to campus. So, and we chose those 5 specific areas or venues because number 1, safety. Number 2, they allow the most amount of people, and also it's close to campus. We try to pick those spaces where students have easy access to. I think probably if you can call it difficult, but the most difficult spot for students to get to, just because it's not right adjacent to campus, that would be over by the Sheeman building at the Iowa State Center. So, but other than that, most of our venues are right here on campus, so it's easy access for students, faculty, and staff.
Along those same lines, I remember maybe 2 years ago, we had somebody who wanted to speak inside of one of the campus buildings in order to do that. So maybe you could sort of clarify how indoor space at a public university is different from outdoor space at a public university.
Absolutely. Those, of course, are going to have a different type of requirement. Those have to be approved ahead of time. Back in my last major indoor academic space event that I, that I worked was actually, I'm going to go back to 2005. I know a lot of you weren't even close to here in 2005, but we actually had, at the time, it was then Vice President Joe Biden at that time had come to speak at Howe Hall. And so we were able to actually, and this was a very long, arduous process. We actually had, not only was it known about 3 months ahead of time, but we also had, prior to the event, 2 weeks out, we had to do a lot of special planning for that. Classes had to be rescheduled for that time frame. Of course, that had to bring in, depending on the building, since Howe Hall is aerospace engineering building, we had to make sure all faculty, staff, and the department chair knew what was going on. We don't often allow those anymore, which is why we determined that, we're going to have 5 spaces, and these will be the 5 spaces that will be allowed. And of course, they're all in areas that are not academic related buildings. Anytime an individual would like to, now we've also had student organizations ask to have a speaker come and speak during an event, such maybe a club meeting. And oftentimes these are going to be held within our academic buildings. That process is oftentimes done two ways. Number one, it's going to go through the event authorization for student organizations, so they have to register through there. And number two, they have to set up through room scheduling to make sure that the room that they want for their event is going to be free. And it also has enough space to where whatever their expected attendance is, because the organizations have to let us know, and the groups have to let us know how many people do you expect to attend this event. So that way they can kind of help plan for that area as well. And again, just like the regular events authorization, student events authorization goes through a committee, and ISU Police does sit on that committee. So if there are any types of safety concerns, because if you have a certain number of people you're expected, anything over 1,000 participants, we're going to require you to have ISU Police on scene. And that's just part of our risk assessment that we go through for any type of event, regardless of content.
Carrie,
Sure, go ahead.
Carrie, would you talk about a little bit about what's his name, Nick? Fuentes, yeah, Nick Fuentes. When he came, I mean, it was. I mean, we were from the newspaper standpoint, the data standpoint, it was seemed to be very quickly done by I think it's Turning Point that was the people. But could you
Absolutely. Yeah, because we were called to that area, and the reason why we were called had nothing to do with the content or the visitor, but for the fact that they had not rented the space. It had not gone through the process. So that is how we were able to go ahead and stop in, speak with the organizer of the group and say, here's the deal, I'm sorry, you're going to have to move to a different space, whether that's a public space, anywhere within the university, but you cannot remain in this classroom here. So we would do that for any group, but absolutely good point, because I do believe they did later on move to another location over by Carver. Yep, absolutely.
Yes.
I have a question, like in relation to like all the protesting you talked about, like April 27th, Ben Shapiro coming to CY Stevens. I was wondering like what you guys are expecting from that event, like, what you guys think will happen, or if you've had anything contacting you about things that are going to happen.
Absolutely, great question, because it's those types of events. Whenever we find out about an event that's coming to campus that may have had a lot of issues at other campuses, of course, that we're interested in that information. But for the Ben Shapiro event, we're treating it like any other event that would be held there. We have officers working that event as we would any at CY Stevens, and we're just going to follow the basic protest policy guidelines if we have anyone. If there's a counter protest outside, they'll be allowed to protest outside. Again, as Amanda talked about, if it gets disruptive inside, of course, that's not, the purpose. We're hoping that doesn't happen, but if so, we have individuals in place who will be able to address those issues and hopefully continue to keep the event going while still giving everyone the opportunity to express their opposite, opinions, whatever that may look like. But yes, we actually have quite a few meetings to make sure that everyone's rights are going to be protected during that event. So, but great question.
So, Lectures is coordinating with the student group that is sponsoring Mr. Shapiro. So we met with Public Safety and ISU PD, and we met with the Stevens Auditorium. We have not had an event at Stevens since pre-COVID. So some new things are, Iowa State Center is now under the purview of the athletics department. And one of the things the athletics department does is have a clear bag policy. Because we are expecting a large number of people, many of whom are very excited about the speaker, and there are some who are not so excited about the speaker, we have chosen to institute some extra safety measures. There is a no bag policy, and this is on our website for the event, other than medical bags or diaper bags. We have heard that it's possible that students from other universities are going to be coming. So we're reserving seats for Iowa State students, and we're asking Iowa State students to enter in 2 particular doors. You show your ID, you get a seat. Everybody else has to go through the north doors. Just things like that. We're not allowing large signage or anything that's on a picket, not because we're trying to stop people from speaking, but because it could harm someone. And one of the things I think people are most concerned about is will he take questions? He is going to take questions, and we worked with the student group and with Ben Shapiro's people. It will be a static microphone on a stand, and yours truly will be standing right there to ensure that there are no issues between students who are sponsoring the event and students who maybe are not as happy about the event and come to ask a question. And so we're trying to mitigate any of those possible confrontations or uncomfortable situations between students by making sure that professional staff is there. And so I do not expect that the ISU community is going to try to stop the event. I expect and I hope that people who are against the event will come and ask questions. And be able to come in and say, this is what he said, and this is what, and I expect social media will pick up. And I hope that it will create dialogue between the people who are really excited he's coming and between the people who are not. And I think this is good for the university. And it's an opportunity to elevate discussion instead of just yelling at each other, which is protected speech. But I think dialogue is much more productive. And we are working very hard with the student group and with Ben Shapiro to make sure that everybody gets a chance to be part of that conversation. Does that answer your question?
Great question. I appreciate you asking that. I think it really shows that the First Amendment doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are other rights and considerations that are constantly being evaluated at the same time. And that's an important point. I want to ask, though, what should a student do if they feel that their right to protest or if some aspect of their First Amendment rights have been violated?
My recommendation would be, because we have several different aspects here on campus, first and foremost, it's always important if you feel like your right to protest was stepped upon or you're being prevented the ability, I always direct a lot of those immediate questions, the Office of University Counsel, which is our ISU legal here on campus. If you feel, though, during your protest that you are not safe, please call ISU Police immediately so we can get to your location and find out what's going on up to that point. Another option is going to be through the Dean of Students Office, through the Office of Student Conduct. Even if you're not even sure if this is the right place to be, go and make an appointment with student assistants and ask the questions. What can the university do? I know what has happened may not necessarily be criminal in nature, but I still feel that my right as a student here on campus, as well as my First Amendment right, is being infringed upon. What action can I take as it relates to that? And of course, if you feel that you've been a victim of a crime during your protest activity or demonstration activity, you're going to contact ISU Police, of course, and then we will go ahead and launch an investigation into that. But again, we're going to talk with you first because maybe you wanted to not necessarily file criminal charges, but you feel that there's also a university sanction. You do have that option, and we want you to know that at the very least, give us a call, talk to us so we can let you know what those options are, and we can hopefully get you to the best office for your specific situation.
Anything to add from your perspective, Amanda? No. Great. Yes, another question.
Can't violating somebody's First Amendment rights sometimes be a criminal offense? I thought there's a, like, Title 18 of the United States Code has, what is it, deprivation of rights in the color of law. Is there any situation where somebody would be charged criminally for violating somebody's First Amendment rights?
They absolutely could be, because one thing you talk about, the color of laws from Title 18, 249, 247, et cetera, are going to be the two main ones that you see quite a bit. Those can still be charged, but again, there's got to be a criminal component to it. I'm going to talk just a little bit about how much I dislike the Iowa hate crime law, because our hate crime law is not as robust as the federal hate crime law, which is why I am a fan of federal hate crime laws. And each state is going to be different, because not every state, only 46 states in the U.S. have a hate crime law to begin with. So that's why it's, number one, a good thing to have a hate crime law. For Iowa, hate crime is not a crime in and of itself. It's actually enhanceable to 4 and only 4 specific crimes here in Iowa. The first one is assault. The second one is trespass. The third is going to be arson, and then the fourth is going to be criminal mischief, such as vandalism. One of those 4 crimes needs to be committed before we can do the enhanceable hate crime. Now, depending on the seriousness or the nature of it, and based on does it fall underneath Title 18, 247, and 249, absolutely. So if somebody is trying to express their ideas during a protest or a demonstration and they become a victim of Title 18, 249, or 247, and it also falls underneath the Iowa hate crime law as well, then we're going to be able to, we can definitely look at that. I'm disappointed that harassment does not fall underneath the Iowa hate crime law, but it does under federal. So again, the federal is oftentimes going to be a better choice as it relates to hate crimes and the intrusion on the First Amendment, but it can also be a very difficult one to prosecute as well. But no, that's a great question, but absolutely, that's why if you're unsure, always call ISU Police to at least, ask those questions if you're unsure, because we'll always talk to you.
Good question. So as we're nearing the end of our time, be sure you're asking your questions if you have any. My final question, though, is in honor of First Amendment Days. I was hoping that maybe stepping back a little bit from ISU specifically, if you would be so kind as to share your perspective on the First Amendment, in particular the right to protest, but really just the First Amendment overall.
I think we're very fortunate. We live in a country where we do have the First Amendment and freedom to express our ideas, our thoughts, our opinions, because this is a freedom that is not granted to everybody in the world. And so I think it's very much a part of who we are here at ISU, as well as in the state of Iowa, the U.S., and of course the world. It's always, I know sometimes we can, it can become very advantageous. It can become, we wonder, let's see, what am I trying to say here? It can be very difficult sometimes because a lot of times people's freedom of expression can be very hurtful. And I understand that we've had a lot of conversations about that here on campus. But I think it's very important to understand that we still have that freedom, and I think we need to protect everyone's freedom up to the point to where it becomes a place where we are then, of course, crossing that line into the criminal aspect, of course. But I think it's important that we continue to have those conversations. I think Amanda said it best when she was discussing the fact that arguing and just trying to be overheard everybody else is not dialogue. It's not discussion. It's not a true expression of ideas or an exchange of ideas. Instead, it's just trying to be louder than the other person. I think it's especially true for our freedom of press, because I think a free press is the cornerstone of a free society. And I think anytime we start to censure or shut down ideas is when we really kind of start to get on that slippery slope, and I think that could only harm our society as opposed to making it better.
I think Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said in an opinion that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And my entire legal career has been based on making sure that we don't silence people. Because when you silence people, they don't stop talking. They just don't talk out loud. They go underground. They go to the internet. They pull away from an open society. And I think it's really important, especially in a time when there's a lot of misinformation, that we don't try to strangle that First Amendment. It's part of the process, and we just have to find better ways of communicating good information and correct information. The First Amendment also, for me in particular, there are two aspects that have nothing to do with today, but I just want to mention is the right to express your religion. And the Supreme Court has ruled that also means that you have the right to not have religion. And I'm an atheist, and I cannot tell you how many times I have been across this country and been discriminated against. And it is not something that we have that protection in other places in the world. And also the right to petition our government for grievances. The courts are a very powerful way to ensure your rights. And, whether it's, talking to your city council or a representative, or actually government is also the university. It's a state government funded institution. You have that right to make your voice heard to those who have been put in positions of power. And again, as you look at what's happening with subjugation of press and speech in Russia, and what Russia is doing to people in the Ukraine, and countless other countries and locations, that is something that I don't think we appreciate as much as we do, is that we do have free and open access to petition our government, and whether that's directly or through the courts, should be a very much more heralded part of the First Amendment, in my opinion.
Excellent, thank you. I want to thank you both for joining us today, for talking a little bit more about the First Amendment, especially as it relates to protest and the right to protest. This is only midweek in a week jam-packed full of opportunities to talk about these kinds of issues. I have no idea why my computer is flashing on and off and on and off, but hopefully if we can get it up on the screen for enough time, I want to direct your attention to our lecture tonight, where we will continue this very important conversation, but online. Suzanne Nossel will speak through WebEx, so you're all welcome to join us, and we hope that you do, on the issue of protecting free speech on the front lines. And in particular, some of the laws and issues that come up in our state houses regarding free speech. So please tune in for that. We have events Thursday as well. We'll have a feast on the 1st on Central Campus, where we'll have t-shirts and free food. And did I mention ISU Creamery ice cream for free? So join us 11 to 1 in front of Curtis Hall. And then the conversation continues on Friday with more online sessions that you're all welcome to attend. So please go to our website to find out more about our complete schedule at First Amendment Days this week. And again, I want to thank the speakers. We'll stick around here for a little while longer if you have any additional questions. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.